You're listening to The Granite Discourse, a New Hampshire-based podcast with real discussions. Be sure to subscribe on Spotify, YouTube, and Apple Podcasts. And for early access, subscribe to Patreon for just $1 a month. Thank you, and enjoy the show. Dave Scanlan, Secretary of State, Dave Scanlan.
That's right. Nice to be here.
Welcome to The Granite Discourse. You're the highest ranking government official I've had on so far, so I appreciate you coming here.
Well, I'm honored. Thank you.
I've seen on social media that you've been traveling around, like you were in Effingham last week, and you were talking about elections.
I've been doing that all over the state. In Effingham, I was invited to go and speak at the public library.
Yeah.
It was probably over a month ago. A really good crowd for a small town. There are probably 40 people there. And,
oh, wow.
And the discussions that I have is just, I start off talking about elections, and then it morphs into an interactive discussion about answering questions about elections, trying to give people information about things they might not know about the election process. After that first event, I was invited back, and the second meeting was mostly election officials, which was a different type of discussion, but also very informative and an opportunity to exchange ideas.
And what kind of questions are you getting from people?
It's the full spectrum. So the laws have changed recently, and people who are registering to vote for the first time are now required to prove all of the qualifications needed to vote. So documentation has to be presented that shows identity, age, citizenship, and domicile. So there are a lot of questions about that.
What are the types of documentation that are needed for that?
Well, there's some presumptive forms. The fastest one is probably a passport, and not everybody has one of those. But in most instances, there's a photo, proves identity, age. You don't get a passport unless you're a United States citizen, and then if your physical address is on there, that's your domicile. But a driver's license goes a long way. A birth certificate, naturalization papers. The documents like that.
And are those changes? Are those at the state level?
Those are required at the state level. They're required by state law. There is a federal act that is trying to pass, known as the SAVE Act, which has many of those provisions in it.
And that hasn't really. There's been a lot of arguing over the SAVE Act.
It does not seem like it's getting over the hump in terms of support to pass at the federal level.
But what would that change if it were to pass?
Not much in New Hampshire. Because it addresses proving qualifications, especially citizenship. It would regulate on a heavier basis mail-in voting. New Hampshire already does that. In our Constitution, you can only vote by absentee ballot if you are absent or you have a disability. Excuse me. So the number of people that are voting by mail in New Hampshire is limited. It's probably 6 to 8% in any given election. Some states have early voting. New Hampshire has election day, and that's it. So, like I said, most of the things that are in the SAVE Act, New Hampshire is already in compliance with.
So, with New Hampshire being the way it is, how much different is it from like other states? Like if you were to compare us to like some of these states that you hear all this fighting about, like absentee ballots. What is every state's allowed to make their own rules? Is that how that works with elections? Like how much oversight does the federal government have on elections right now?
Well, every state has its own election laws. Most of the states in the country, and this is where New Hampshire is different, have to comply with the National Voter Registration Act, which is also known as Motor Voter. New Hampshire has an exemption from that because when the act passed, we had Election Day voter registration. There were 5 or 6 other states that had the same thing. And if you had that Election Day registration, then the other provisions of the act did not apply to the states. So what does that mean? In the other states, there are other state agencies and federal agencies that are voter registration agencies. And basically those are agencies that have some public connection with the voters of that state. So a Health and Human Services agency where there are social workers that go out and meet with the people can also collect voter registrations when they have those interactions.
Really?
Really. The Department of Motor Vehicles in the other states, when people go to get a driver's license or register their car, can also collect voter registrations at those offices. A Department of Education, which has outreach to voting age students, is also or can be a voter registration agency, and they can collect voter registrations. In fact, anybody in those other states can conduct a voter registration drive on their own simply by walking down any main street or attending a public event and just passing out registration forms, having people fill them out, collecting them, and then turning them into a voter registration office. You can see the potential problems that type of a system might have, but most of the other states in this country operate under that type of a voter registration program under the NVRA, National Voter Registration Act. In New Hampshire, because we had the exemption, we never went down that path. So for a person in New Hampshire that wants to vote for the first time, they have to go to their own local election official and have that interaction to make that registration happen.
Supervisor of the checklist?
It could be the town clerk or the supervisors of the checklist. In New Hampshire, supervisors of the checklist are the only election official that can put names on a checklist or take names off the checklist. Even the Secretary of State can't do that. These are all people that are elected at the local level at your town meetings. And so hopefully you know who they are and that they're trustworthy and they do a good job. But our process of voter registration is much more intimate here than it is in almost every other state in the country.
I don't think people understand the importance of that role, supervisor of the checklist.
You're probably right. I mean, I don't want to say it's an obscure position in an elective office, but it's a very, very important one.
Well, for local politics, a lot of voters probably don't even know what it is.
You maybe
because a lot of people, like I've said before on here, is I know a lot of people don't know they have a state representative or that New Hampshire even has its own Congress.
Yeah,
they vote every couple of years, and they'll usually go up or down the ticket. You know,
one of the things I've been working on as Secretary of State is trying to increase the transparency of the election process and also the public education of the voting process. Most people that are registered, they go to the polls, they check in, they get their ballot, they go to a booth, they vote, hand their ballot in. But they're probably not aware of the many checks and balances that are actually at play in the polling place while they're voting. Mm-hmm. For example, the ballot clerks that cross your name off when you check in and hand you a ballot, in the first instance, are appointed by the two political parties, Republicans and Democrats. The idea is that they sit side by side, they kind of keep their eye on each other in the process. And so there are party affiliation eyes on what's going on in a polling place. And then in addition to that, each party can appoint an official challenger at the polling place. And that individual gets to sit in close proximity to the check-in table so they can see and they can hear what's actually happening. And they can they can challenge qualifications of a voter if they have a reason to believe that person's not qualified. Most of the time, they're keeping track of the supporters of a political party so that if their people are not turning out, they can have somebody else go make phone calls. You better get down here and vote. It's a close election. We need your vote. And then from the time the polls open to the time the polls close and the moderator announces the results, it's a transparent, open, completely observable process.
Mm-hmm.
And in the end, the ballots are sealed in boxes, and then they're available for recounts. The law now requires that after an election is over, we have random audits of the election itself, and those towns that use voting machines, ballot counting machines, we have a random audit of those as well.
We just got our first ballot counting machine here in Effingham recently.
The election officials in town were talking about that at the meeting last week. The neat thing about the device that they chose is manufactured by Voting Works, and that's a company that uses open source software in the coding of those devices, which means that if somebody has the desire and the technical expertise to read the code, they can actually see how those devices are configured to read the ballots.
Is that good or bad?
That's a good thing.
Okay.
And that adds to transparency.
Okay, but what a lot of people, including myself, would get worried about any sort of potential for being hacked or like changing votes. Is there any danger to that from what you've seen? We've
taken strong protections to make sure that happens. I mentioned how we're trying to be more transparent because it's those parts of the election process that are not transparent that cause people to, think about what could go wrong. Ballot counting devices are one of those because once you feed your ballot in, you're really not sure what it's doing in there, and you hope that it's counting the ballots properly. So,
ballot counters in general too, because then you have to trust the people that are counting them as well.
That's right. So you need checks and balances in place to do that. The Ballot Law Commission is made up of individuals by both parties, and they're appointed by the Senate President, the Speaker of the House, and the Governor. And that's the body that approves ballot counting devices in the state. And one of the primary requirements was that those devices cannot have wireless capability.
Mm-hmm.
They can't be connected to the internet. They can't have a modem in them. And that's to eliminate the opportunity for, somebody to electronically get into those through wireless capability. Now, they do have...
That's reassuring.
That is reassuring. I will say that no device is foolproof because if the right conditions exist, anything that's electronic can be tampered with. And if they can't do it wirelessly, but if they have a certain type of access to those devices where they get a hold of them, outside of the process, that could also be a problem. So not only do they have wireless capability, but the town clerks are responsible for their safekeeping. They're to be kept in containers. It might be a canvas case. It might be a box that have numbered seals on them. There's a log that is supposed to be kept. So anytime the seal is broken, it has to be recorded. The new seal is placed on it. And whenever there is access, the purpose of that access has to be written down. That's one way to do it. The new devices, ballot counting devices, now use digital scan technology, which means that every ballot that goes through the device has the records the image of the ballot. It doesn't tie the ballot to the voter, but it records the image. So in the process of doing an audit, we can pull up the image of the ballot. We can see how the device counted the ballot and make sure that the device counted it the same way that the moderator would have counted the ballot if it was being done by hand. And then it's really easy to get a recount in New Hampshire, and we have plenty of those. And when we do a recount, it's always the actual paper ballot, and we look at every ballot, and the candidates and their observers get to see every ballot, and they get to see how that ballot is being counted. And then, of course, we compare those results with the election night result. And then there are physical post-election audits where we randomly choose polling places, and we randomly choose electronic ballot counting devices, and then we do an audit of those, either the polling place or the ballot counting device, and make sure that the results are accurate, that the audit results compare to the election night results.
So if you do an audit, you're going to a polling place to do this, or you're going to where they're housed?
We collect the ballots, take them to Concord. It's a public process.
How many people are involved in that?
There are usually 3 or 4 counting teams, and then anybody that wants to observe the process.
Are those volunteers?
They're volunteers, interested parties. But again, it's public, so we post when they're going to happen, so anybody that wants to participate can.
Are they recorded?
They're not recorded.
No?
No.
And it's a lot that goes into the elections. I didn't realize how much it goes into the checks and balances, because when you go and you vote, you see the people that are volunteering. One thing that I know I've heard locally is that there's not enough volunteers.
It's a big job to conduct an election. And in New Hampshire, the elections are conducted at the local level with the locally elected election officials that we talked about earlier. And we have a lot of really great election officials, people that step up and basically volunteer their time to do this. It's rewarding, and I would recommend that everybody give it a shot and participate, because it also lets you see firsthand how the elections are run and what the moving parts are. The Secretary of State is responsible for the administration of that entire process, making sure that the election laws are followed. It is up to the Attorney General in the state to enforce the election laws. So if there's a violation, it will be the Attorney General knocking at the door and not me in that regard. But my responsibility is to print the ballots, and we print the ballots after we conduct the filing period to run for office. And by the way, that's coming up beginning June 4th. Yeah. It's the first Wednesday in June through the Friday of the following week. So anybody that's listening to your podcast and they want to run for office, that's the window of opportunity.
What are the requirements?
So the requirements are simple. You have to be old enough. And there are some age thresholds. If you're running for state representative, it's 18. If you are running for the state Senate, I'm going to have to check the statute on this, but it's either 25 or 30. I'm just trying to think now. If you are running for governor, you have to have lived in the state for 7 years. If anybody has questions about that, you can call my office and I'll get you the exact statute.
State senators have to be 30.
Okay.
Yeah. And governor has to be 30 as well?
I believe so.
Okay. And 7 years. Is that the only one with a domicile minimum? Nope.
So to run for office, you have to live in the town that covers the district of that office. So if you're running for governor of the United States Senate, you can live anywhere in the state of New Hampshire. If you're running for Congress, then you have to live, well, actually, Congress is unique. You do not have to live in the congressional district that you are running from. So technically, you could live in CD1 and run in CD2.
Yeah, I think that people have said that about Goodlander, that she lives in CD1, or she had lived in CD1.
She's had residences in
So that's
both
legal.
districts. It's legal, yes. However, if you're running for a state office, if you're running for state senate, you have to live in the Senate district that you're running in. If you're running for state rep, you have to live in one of the towns in the state representative district.
And then state rep, it says here that you have to be there for at least 2 years. Now, when you fill out a not nomination paper, but what's the paper called? Is it a declaration?
A declaration of candidacy.
Okay.
If you were going to run in a party primary.
Okay. But you can run as an independent as well.
And that's a different process.
That's a different process.
Yeah. So if you're going to run as an independent or a third-party candidate, during the filing period, you would fill out and submit a declaration of intent. And that states that you intend to run for whatever the office is that you're going to run for. And then you have a period of time to collect nomination petitions. Depending on the office you're running for, determines how many petitions you have to collect. If it's state representative, I think it's 150. If it is U.S. Senate, it's 3,000. And so it's, so depending on what you're running for, it could be anywhere in between. Once the signatures have to be collected from registered voters in New Hampshire. Once they are collected, they have to be sorted by town or city and then submitted to the supervisors of the checklist of those towns. The supervisors have to certify that the person that signed them is in fact a registered voter. And then once that's done, the candidate has to collect all of those and submit them to my office just before the state primary. And then we will count them up to make sure that the requisite number has been met. And when that happens, the candidate then automatically goes on the general election ballot. They skip the primary election altogether.
Now, what is the process if you want to be in the primary as a Democrat or a Republican?
If you are running for any office other than state representative, then you would come to my office during the filing period, fill out the declaration of candidacy, and pay the filing fee.
Which is?
It depends on the office. For state representative, it's $2. And for the first time this year, state representatives have the option of signing up in my office as opposed to with their town clerk.
Okay.
They can do it in either place. For the state, senate, and county offices, it's $10. If it is executive council and governor, it goes up incrementally. The highest fee is $100. And
they don't need any nomination papers for that?
They don't need nomination petitions, but the law does provide that in lieu of paying the cash filing fee, they can collect nomination papers just to show that they have enough support to be to run in a party primary.
And how many is that?
For state representative, I think it's 5.
5?
It's small. It's not a big.
So if you want to be an independent, it's 150. But if you're on the party, it's 5.
But remember, the party has. If you're running in a party, you have to get through the primary.
Okay.
To get on the general election ballot.
So that's the trade-off.
That's the trade-off.
I always wondered why. Okay. So 150 if you're an independent and 5 if you're not. But okay, I understand that now a little better because when I first learned that, I always thought, I always looked at that as, well, that sounds a little shady, but it makes sense when you put it that way. So you've been traveling around trying to inform people about the new rules that have been coming up, and how are people receiving it? Because I know some people were, especially with the SAVE Act, people were saying that there were going to be, women going to the polls and they wouldn't be able to vote because they had their name changed and they didn't have the proper documentation. And that hasn't passed, but it being not much different than New Hampshire, I know one person that got turned away at the polls, and it wasn't a woman. It was a buddy of mine, and he had gotten his name changed recently, and so he had to go back and get his birth certificate, I think, and provide that, but he was able to vote. Do you think that there are people that might be unnecessarily concerned about changes coming up, or worried about the future of their voting rights, for instance?
Well, I certainly understand that people are concerned. The law that passed in New Hampshire, which mimics the SAVE Act, that requires the documentation, including for name change, has been in place now for 2 rounds of town meetings. It has not been applied yet for a round of state elections. There have been reports from some groups that have been monitoring the polling places that people have been turned away from the polls. People have had to leave the polls to get documentation, and for the most part, they seem to have come back so that they can participate in the election. My office has not had any complaints yet about people that were not able to exercise their right to vote. And if the Attorney General's office has had complaints, it is very, very few, like a handful. Now, the people that participate in local elections are usually more politically savvy in terms of, making sure that they understand what the issues are. They turn out for all elections, whether they're state and local. But whenever we have state and federal elections, people seem to come out of the woodwork. If it's a general election when there's president, we have people that just come out every 4 years so they can just vote for president. And so there may be people that show up that just aren't aware of how the laws may have changed. So we are taking steps in my office to minimize the impact that where there may be some voters that show up and they don't have documentation. There may be some voters that legitimately don't have the documentation and have trouble getting it. So we have a hotline that is available in the clerk's offices, and it will be available on Election Day, where they can get into the statewide voter registration database, which they have access to, and through that system can now query the Division of Motor Vehicle database so that they can see citizenship information on voters, because if people have applied for a real ID, that information may have been provided. So if they can verify that, then that will satisfy the documentation requirement. Interestingly, a real ID, though, is not proof of citizenship, because you don't have to be a citizen to get one. You have to be legally in this country, but you don't have to be a citizen.
What is the point of the real ID?
To allow people to travel on airplanes. It's a government ID that shows the proof of that individual. In this case, whether they're a U.S. citizen or they're here on a green card, the person has gone through the process of proving their qualifications. But the real ID can be used to prove identity, age, and domicile if that's on the card. For the local election officials through the voter registration database can also can access the vital records database, which has information on births and deaths and marriages, name changes, things like that. So we're setting up now so that we can help voters electronically get into a system and help verify qualifications that may be missing. Now, that's great if all of those events happened in New Hampshire. But if people got married out of state, or they were born out of state, or they were naturalized out of state, it does become more difficult because we don't have access to those other states.
So those people have to go or contact wherever they came from and get the documentation.
They might. Now, there is one avenue that we have just arranged, and that is to access the federal SAVE database, which does have naturalization information and citizenship information on quite a few voters, but it will the access will only occur if the voter signs a document that says, yes, I want to use the federal database to help me prove these qualifications.
So the SAVE database, that's already a federal database?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
And how long has that been around?
I couldn't tell you how long it has been around, but it has been growing for some time. Some states are utilizing it to match voter data. It does, to get proper matches, it does require information beyond just the public checklist. And that is information that I am not permitted to just provide by statutory provision.
Is this the information the Trump administration was trying to get you to give to the federal government?
It would be.
It would be.
It would be. But the difference is that the Trump administration is looking for the entire database of information, every voter's information. And New Hampshire law is very clear that I would commit a misdemeanor if I gave that information up. And then in addition to that, the statutes that the feds are citing that give them the authority to request that information, according to the lawyers, the attorneys in my office and the Attorney General's office, does not give them that authority. So that question is pending in court, and we'll see the outcome of that. But the reason why we use the SAVE Act for individual voters is because it is the request is being made by the voter, and the voter is voluntarily providing the information that the SAVE database would want to be able to help them verify the qualification that they're looking for, and that's the difference.
Okay. Yeah, because I had mentioned to a friend of mine that you were coming on. He said, ask him what it is that's preventing you from giving that information up. If those provisions weren't in place where you would be committing a crime to release it, would you release it anyways?
If it was within my authority statutorily to do so, then yes. I would follow the law. I mean, that's
What is the reasoning for them to collect all the information? What are they trying to do with it exactly?
The feds have not clearly said that. They have said things like, we want to make sure that the states are properly maintaining the voter checklists. But they have also said things like they want to share it with other federal agencies to make sure that the people that are participating are United States citizens. Mm-hmm. Those are valid concerns.
Yeah.
But there is also, there should also be concerns at the state level that you don't want a federal executive to have so much power over the election process that they can have their thumb on the results. And that's why, it's clear in the Constitution that the states are responsible for conducting the elections. It just keeps the playing field level and fair. In terms of maintaining the voter checklist, New Hampshire does a good job at that, and the legislature continues to make improvements. Starting with the law that we've been talking about, where documentation is now required to register to vote. In the past, every 10 years after the federal census and the redistricting takes place, there is a requirement that the checklist be verified. Some call it a purge, where any voter who has been inactive for 4 complete years, they have not voted in any election within a 4-year period, has their name dropped from the list. And if they're still out there and they want to participate in the election, they have to re-register. Just to show you how quickly a checklist can age, the last time we went through the 10-year purge, on a checklist that had just over 1 million names on it, about 180,000 names were dropped off the list.
Almost a fifth.
Almost a fifth.
Wow.
What happens in the next presidential general election after that, though, is you get about 100,000 of those people that got dropped getting back on the checklist. You see the number of Election Day registrations just skyrocket. So what the legislature has done this last session is they passed a law now where we do that verification every year, and we drop voters that have not participated in the last 5 years.
Okay.
Same way, the voters will get sent a letter, but if they want to continue to participate in the election process, they have to re-register.
Okay.
So just by doing that is really going to clean up the dormant names on the list.
Is that letter before or after the election? Before or after 5th year? So is it a warning letter, like you're going to get dropped if you don't vote?
No, it's a letter saying if you have not voted in 5 years, then you're going to get a letter saying that you've not participated in an election for the last 5 years. Therefore, the law requires your name get dropped off the list. If you want to continue to vote, then you can go to your town clerk or supervisors and re-register, or show up at the polls on Election Day and register.
And so that before it was 4 years, how long was it that way for, where it was only 4 years?
Decades. Yeah.
Okay. All right. That makes sense, because I knew somebody that passed away and they were still on the voter rolls for, I think, 2 cycles. Mm-hmm. And after that, they were gone. I could see the name on there when I was going to vote.
So in that regard, there are 2 additional things that we're doing to keep the checklist clean. One is that the Division of Vital Records receives information about deaths that occur in New Hampshire fairly quickly, but they also receive information from deaths of New Hampshire citizens that occur in another state. And the closer you are to New Hampshire, the faster that information comes in, the further away, the slower it seems to be. But that information is then passed down to the supervisors of the checklist so that they can verify the death at the local level and then remove that voter's name from the list. We're also getting information now on a regular basis from the U.S. Postal Service on their national change of address information. So if the post office has been notified that a former New Hampshire resident has moved to a different state, then we receive that information and those names can be dropped off the list as well.
When did you start your first term as Secretary of State?
It was 2022.
2022.
Yep.
And what made you want to be the Secretary of State?
I served in the legislature for 16 years.
Wow.
Ramping up in 2002 when I moved to the Secretary of State's office and took the job as Deputy Secretary under Bill Gardner. He was the longest-serving Secretary of State in the country. When he retired, it was 46 years.
Wow.
So, I mean, people trusted him. So I had the privilege of serving with him for 20 years. I learned a lot in that process, and I'm applying that now in my 5th year as Secretary of State.
Mm-hmm. And what have you learned since taking on the role as Secretary of State that you didn't know before?
Not much, but what I can tell you is that the job has become a lot more challenging over the last few years. It is much, much different than it was when I first started as a deputy in the office. Did
it start getting a little more intense maybe around 2020?
Well, I mean, yes. Yeah. So, the polarization of politics has been increasing. Lack of confidence in the voting process has been increasing. A lot of that is because what happens at the national level, mm-hmm. and people in New Hampshire read what happens at the national level, think that that's what's happening here, even though we have a process, as we discussed earlier, that is fundamentally different than the way the other states run it. But technology has really taken off in how elections are conducted. Along with that, there are concerns about cybersecurity, actions by foreign actors trying to infiltrate election systems and electronic systems generally.
Do we see that in New Hampshire?
Yes. Yeah, we see attempts.
Really?
Yes.
What do they look like?
Just pinging, hits at the firewall, trying to get in. And we've been fortunate where I'm not aware of any intrusion into our election system that I would consider a breach.
Do you know where they're originating from?
China, Iran, Soviet Union.
Wow.
The typical characters. And the law enforcement community in New Hampshire has regular briefings about the potential threats that are out there. And, a lot of it is activity by foreign actors, things that we should watch out for. We work with the Department of Information Technology in New Hampshire just to make sure that, the firewalls and everything are secure.
Updated.
Yeah. And we have our own monitoring processes. The Secretary of State in New Hampshire maintains its own IT department for handling the elections database and everything related to that. And I think we're on the cutting edge of a lot of stuff in regard to keeping those systems safe. Some of the other things we've been dealing with, we had the pandemic. 2019, the 2020 election was conducted under a major health crisis.
Was there a lot of pressure in New Hampshire for mail-in ballots?
There was. The way we handled that in New Hampshire was, as I mentioned, you can only vote by absentee ballot in New Hampshire if you have an excuse.
What is a qualifying excuse?
Well, in the case of the pandemic, if you were concerned about your safety given the public health crisis, in that instance, it constituted a disability for the purpose of voting. And so what we saw was a typical election, 10% is on the upper end of people that vote by absentee. During the pandemic, it went up to 30. Surprisingly, 70% of the voters in New Hampshire still went out to the polls on the other day when other states were literally shutting down and doing everything by mail. After the pandemic was over, we went right back to normal. Other states kept their vote by mail programs.
It's like how they prefer to do it, it seems like.
Yeah.
And they had drop boxes in a lot of states.
And we have no drop boxes here. We have the partisan breakdown in New Hampshire is very, very close. Right now, I think the Republicans hold about a 50,000 vote registration advantage over the Democrats, but we're talking in the range of both parties are in the ballpark of 250 to 300,000 voters. And then the largest block of voters in the state are undeclared voters, independents. So, it's a battleground state. It's a purple state, and the parties really fight over, that 40%.
Where do you think that 40% leans?
I think that 40% moves. I think it depends on the issues, what's important to them, and there may be some favoritism towards one party or the other, but those voters can be swayed.
Do you notice any trends in voting throughout the year? Like, what have you noticed? Like, okay, like they say Republicans don't do well in the midterms. Do you see any trends in like political national politics or national news stories coming out like that may sway elections more so than like, are there quieter years that are just nothing really? It seems like a lot's going on, or a lot of people aren't showing up to vote. Like, what do you think? What do you think drives voters the most?
Well, usually it's an issue or a candidate that gets people fired up.
Do you want a bubble water?
If you have some water, that would be great. Yeah. That'd be great. Thank you.
So yeah, like this year's we're in the midterms this year, and people are worried that Republicans wouldn't show up to vote. I mean, what do you think is going to happen? What do you see happening?
At this point, it is really hard to predict. There are things that are happening that could influence the outcome. Donald Trump is very popular among Republicans right now. If Republicans sense that he's threatened, it might be enough to get voters to turn out. There's a war going on in Iran, and how that turns out over the next couple months could have a major impact on who turns out to vote. Because of that, gas prices right now are really high.
Yeah, that's not helping.
That could trigger inflation, and pocketbook issues are really important to voters.
Oh yeah.
And if they're feeling pain and they don't see a good reason for it, then they could turn out in a negative way. So I think we're still months out, and a lot can happen in 3 or 4 months. So at this point, it's hard to predict. Conventional wisdom says, and you probably heard this, that the party in power usually loses votes in the midterm election at the federal level. And, only time will tell how that plays out.
Why is that?
I think that's a good question. Yeah, I think that the party in power gets blamed for whatever's
happening while they're in power.
Whatever's happening that people don't like.
So how long is your term for? Is it every 2 years?
2 years. The Secretary of State is elected by the legislature. So after the general election is over, the newly elected members of the House and the Senate come together in a joint convention after they elect their own officers, the Speaker of the House and the Senate President, and they elect the constitutional officers, the Secretary of State and the State Treasurer. The interesting thing about the Secretary of State is it is a state agency. We have a number of divisions. I mentioned vital records. We register corporations and business entities that operate in New Hampshire. There's a Bureau of Securities regulation that licenses dealer brokers. We have the Division of Archives and Records Management, so we keep the state's most precious documents. And then we run the elections. So it's an executive branch agency. I have one foot there, but I'm the only executive branch agency that also has a foot in the legislative branch. And we act as the go-between between the legislature and the chief executive, the governor, especially when legislation is moving from one branch of government to the other.
What are some of the documents that you have, the oldest ones?
We have the ratification document to the United States Constitution. New Hampshire was the 9th state to ratify, and so we have the document that actually ratified as the 9th state, making us the United States of America.
Nice.
It's a priceless. It's on parchment. It's on animal skin. You can see the calligraphy. It's starting to fade over time, but we do put it on display from time to time. The 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence being signed is coming up. New Hampshire, in the archives possession, has the stone engraving which after some years after the Declaration was signed, this person by the name of Stone took the actual document and created an image on a copper plate using some type of a chemical process, and was able to do an etching of the actual Declaration. And then every state that existed at the time was sent a copy of that document. There are only a few in existence today. It's priceless, but we have it. It's in pristine condition, and that will be on display in the State House over the 4th of July.
Will it?
Yep.
Is it been like a time declared for it already, or?
It's going to be there through much of June into July. There's going to be a parade in Concord on the 4th of July, and we're going to have it in a prominent place where people can walk in and take a look at it, along with what's known as the Dunlap Broadside. The Dunlap Broadside is also a version of the Declaration of Independence. Right after it was signed, the text was printed by a printer whose name was Dunlap, and then in print had the names of all of the signatories, and then that was quickly distributed through the colonies so that the citizens of the colonies, the patriots, could actually read it, see who signed it.
That's awesome.
Yeah, and then Josiah Bartlett from New Hampshire, one of the signatories of the Declaration, a very important person in New Hampshire's history. The archives has his waistcoat, which is a very ornate part of his attire. And so we've been putting that on display as well, which is a really, really cool thing.
I saw some of the flags that are on display. There's some from the Civil War at the State House, right in the main lobby there. And I took a tour for that Dan McGuire putting on. Does a good job with the tour.
He does, yeah.
There's a lot of historical stuff in there that you wouldn't realize it, but I mean, great place to bring your kids for a tour, a little school trip.
It's great to see the fourth graders coming through, because I think every fourth grade class goes through the State House. And while I was there this morning, there were 3 groups of students that came by, and they get to taste that rich history that's in the building.
So you said that you did how many years in the State House?
So I served 16 in the legislature. I served 20 years as Bill Gardner's deputy, and I'm in my 5th year as Secretary of State.
What did you do in the private sector?
My background is in forestry.
Oh, really?
I have a forestry degree from West Virginia University. Came to New Hampshire right out of college with my first job. And I still keep my forester license active.
You'll be careful. People will call you a free stater when you say things like that.
That's why I love the story about the Pine Tree Riot.
Yeah.
That's.
So what got you into politics?
When I was practicing forestry early in my career, there were just some environmental issues related to forestry that were being heard in the State House at the time. And I went down and I spoke, and I caught somebody's eye, and the next thing I was approached to run.
They got you.
And they got me.
Did they tell you it'd be one day a week?
Something like that. But, I when I was in high school and college, I just had no desire to, be political, participate in politics. But once you get a taste of it, it kind of grows on you.
Not everybody. I see people dropping out, and they've had enough. Oh, man. So what has been your approach as the Secretary of State? I know you've been going around talking to people about the new laws that are going in place, or they're in place, the new laws in place. Do you feel like that people are receiving the new laws well?
The political parties are polarized right now, and it just seems that the Republicans and the Democrats do not agree on much, including how the elections should be run. And elections are really important, that they be fair and equitable, and they are run in a way that provides accurate and fair election results. People have to trust the results of an election.
Things can get real ugly when that trust goes away.
Well, it's a balancing act. And we don't have to go back too many years when a person that wanted to register to vote in New Hampshire could walk into the town clerk's office and without any documentation at all, simply by signing affidavits, could get registered to vote. And if it was on the day of the election, they would get a ballot, they could vote that ballot and leave. And you can understand with a process like that why some people might stand back and scratch their head and say, hey, wait a minute, why are we just trusting, that this information is true? There ought to be some responsibility to prove qualifications. And so that thought process is reflected now in the law that passed, that now requires documentation to prove everything. And so, there's really two strong components in the election process. And one is that you want to make it reasonably easy for people to exercise their right to vote. But if you carry it too far in the wrong direction, you create a climate where fraud can exist. And that's not good. And the perception of being too easy is not necessarily good because people question the process. The other side of that is making sure that the vote is secure and that you require the qualification standards. And when you do that, you tighten up on the freedom of the ease of voting. But on that side of the spectrum, if you carry it too far, you create a climate where suppression can exist. So the ideal is to try and find the sweet spot in the middle where there's an appropriate balance of ease of voting and making sure that those participating are actually qualified to participate. Because the legislature is responsible for determining where that sweet spot is, and because the legislature is always changing in terms of which party's in power and how much power they have, that sweet spot is not always in the same place. It's getting pulled in one direction or the other. And that's just the way our process is. What I've been trying to do as Secretary of State is reach out to the voters, and I've been speaking with anybody that will listen. Doesn't matter what political party and what the background is, whether they're seniors or veterans or newly naturalized citizens. I want to talk about the process, let voters know how the process works, and hopefully by doing that, build the confidence that the system we have in New Hampshire is a good one, and that in the end, when the dust settles after an election, that the results are accurate and they reflect the outcome of the election.
Out of all the states in our country, have you seen an example of voter suppression that exists today?
I can't say that I see an example of that. There was a period of time in our history when there was voter suppression. And you can go back well over 100 years now, probably 150 years, where vote buying and intimidation in the election process was rampant. Our processes today are so much better than they were back then. And it's because we have a secret ballot. In New Hampshire, it's because we conduct our elections at the local level and the people that are conducting them are known to the community. When you get far from New Hampshire, the elections are run by county organizations, not the state, and not the locals. And poll workers are hired to do a job, but they're not necessarily tied to the community that they're working in at all. And they have processes in place that they may think are innovations, but they actually cause people to question the process. Examples: early voting, where you really extend the voting process, but ballots have to be handled multiple times before they get counted on election day. Vote by mail jurisdictions where they accept ballots as long as they're postmarked on the day of the election or maybe 1 or 2 weeks after the election, which in the case of California might take them months to count. And when in New Hampshire, we report the results of the election the night of the election.
Yeah, I like that.
We do it, it's over, and we know what we're dealing with. But you have some of the states on the West Coast that don't know who wins a seat in Congress for a couple of months afterwards. So that's crazy.
So to contrast my last question with this question is, do you see examples of fraud in this country in other states?
There are examples of fraud in every state, including New Hampshire. There are individuals that vote in inappropriate ways in every election. The good news is that they are rare and they're not organized in any way. Sometimes it's a person just making a bad judgment call. Some examples of that in New Hampshire, there was a voter in Lebanon that went to the polls and voted in the morning, came back to the polls in the afternoon dressed in disguise as a member of the other sex, and registered to vote, and then participated in the election. And it was a local election official that caught on to that and reported it. We've had situations where a voter voted in a polling place that was not where that voter resided. The reason the voter did that was because they were living in a place where they were not supposed to be. And they were concerned that if they voted under that address, there would be personal or legal subsequences. So, there are just situations like that occur that that are fraudulent. People get prosecuted for it, but it does not seem to be an intentional opportunity to change the outcome of an election.
What is the process for somebody that feels like that their vote's been stolen from them? Because I have a friend that voted and went to go vote in 2012, and it was either 2016 or 2008. There were 2 presidential elections that he went to vote in. Every time he went to go vote, he was told he already voted. And he reported it, I believe, to the Secretary of State's office, but I'm not sure anything really came of it. But it's happened to him multiple times. That was in Manchester area.
If that occurs, we take those situations very seriously, and so does the Attorney General's office. And if a situation like that occurs, where a voter goes in to vote, and this is not unusual, and their name is crossed off the list, usually it's because the ballot clerk made an error, and it might have been the person above or below, or sometimes it's a father and son that might have the same name.
Yeah.
But if the voter is adamant that they did not vote and they're willing to sign an affidavit to that effect, then we will, take every opportunity to make sure that that person does not lose that right to vote. And if it does happen, we should be called right away so that we can resolve it on the day of the election to make sure that voter can vote.
Is there any way to find out who would have taken that vote if it was something not quite on the level?
Each of those situations are different, and it would require questioning the ballot clerks, the people that were maybe contacting names above and below, just to try and figure out exactly what happened. Now people are required to show a photo ID when they go in, so hopefully those are those instances are going to be more rare. More and more polling places now are using electronic poll books, which are more accurate. If a voter is willing to have their driver's license scanned, the voting information will actually just automatically pop up on the screen, and then the supervisor of the checklist will just push the key that designates that person has signed in to vote.
Are those accessible to Wi-Fi? Are those Wi-Fi accessible?
Those are connected. I don't know that it is Wi-Fi, but they are connected
to a network.
To a network somehow. There's also a paper checklist that is required to be kept in parallel with that. So when a voter checks in using one of those devices, a paper receipt is printed out, and then there's a runner that takes that to a clerk that is marking off the actual checklist. The reason for that is if the electronic system fails in some way, the marked paper checklist is there to just keep going if we have to.
When you vote with these new counting machines, who's responsible to insert the ballot into the counting machine? Is that the voter? Can somebody take that from them and put it in, or is that...
The law says that if a polling place uses an electronic ballot counting device, the voter inserts the ballot into the device. If it is a hand count town, and there still are some up in this area of the state, then the ballot is to be, after it is completed, is to be folded by the voter and then handed to the moderator.
Mm-hmm.
It's the moderator's job to make sure that there's only one ballot there, and then the moderator drops it.
That makes sense.
Box.
But the machine itself, if you're feeding it into the machine, that's the voter's responsibility.
Yes.
Okay. I just wanted to know.
Yeah. It's easy in a state election because there's usually just one ballot. And I know that those devices now are being used at the local level as well. And there are towns and school districts that use the Senate Bill 2 ballot, which means all of the articles on the warrant
SB2 towns
are voted on a paper ballot. Sometimes those ballots might be 3 or 4 or 5 pages long.
Yeah.
And so, the voter ends up feeding a series of ballots through, which can actually slow the process down.
What do you think of SB2 towns compared to town meeting towns?
I'm a fan of traditional town meeting.
Are you?
I just, I love the debate and and just the way the process works. But I understand that towns have grown in size, and the issues that they take up are more complex. And so Senate Bill 2 is an opportunity to just give more people the opportunity to vote on the questions on an article as opposed to taking 5 or 6 hours out of their day to sit through a meeting and debate and vote.
What's been your most memorable moment working in the Secretary of State office?
The most fun thing for me is the first of the nation presidential primary and all of the presidential candidates that come through. It's a big deal in New Hampshire because we're first. They get so much media attention when they come in and sign up. And, it's just fun getting the opportunity to meet Donald Trump and Nikki Haley and Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton and all the others.
Who's been your favorite national figure that you've met?
I don't know that I have a favorite. It has been fun to meet Donald Trump.
Has it?
Because he is a different candidate and he's just a different person. And the story from the last election, he in 2024, he was the first candidate who has served as president to actually come into the office to file for a primary election.
Oh, really?
So he made history just by doing that. And then when the candidates, especially when major candidates show up, the halls of the State House are lined with supporters. And usually they're loud, and especially when the candidate comes around the corner on the second floor, it gets really loud. when Donald Trump came in, he had a rope line set up, and his supporters were behind it. And before he got there, it was a typical crowd. But the really unique thing about him, when he came around the corner, it was dead silent. You could hear a pin drop. And I had never seen anything like that before. And so he took his time coming down the hall, greeting every one of his supporters. He signed a bunch of the MAGA hats, shook hands, and eventually he made it into the office. And with all of the national media there, it was like somebody flicked a switch. He turned into the Donald Trump that you see on TV a lot. He was kind of raucous and getting around. And then after the ceremony was over, he came into the inner office where a lot of the candidates will sit down and meet with my staff and others. And at that point, he took the time to talk to everybody in the room. Very, very personable. You can see why people really, really like him. But it was just, there was a dichotomy. The interesting thing is Donald Trump and I share the same birthday, June 14th. He's older than I am, but we're Geminis, and that's the twins. It's kind of a, maybe it's that, personality difference, in different settings that is appropriate. But that was just a really unusual event.
So your impression of him is a lot different than what the media portrays him as then.
Yeah. I saw a side of him that, the average person doesn't see.
When election season comes up, what is your? Because as a Republican, you're supposed to probably stay neutral, obviously, throughout every.
I stay completely neutral in races. Members of both parties are welcome in the office. We treat them exactly the same. There was a long while in the office, it was a tradition where the Secretary of State and staff just did not attend partisan political events, which is really good to help maintain that neutrality. I changed that up when I became secretary, not because I was attending the political events as a partisan politician, but because I felt that as secretary, it was important to go out and talk to both parties about the state of our elections and how they're run, and to answer questions, as the referee. Mm-hmm. And that has been really well received. It's the same message. It doesn't matter which group I go to talk. It's the same message that we're having here today.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that there needs to be more discussion among both sides, three sides really, because it's both sides competing for independence. It mm-hmm. seems like, and there's a lot of partisan politics throughout. Seems like everything, pop culture and media in general. Have you, with the increase in population that we've seen since COVID, I think something like 15 or 20%. Have you watched the voter registrations and what trends are growing among the voters that have moved here?
The demographics are always changing. And when I first entered the legislature, I was a state rep from Grafton County. Excuse me. That county was almost entirely Republican mm-hmm. At the time. Hanover was sent Democrats to the legislature, and there might have been one or two towns, that also sent legislators. I served from 1984 through 2002 in the legislature, and I never served in the minority during that time. But over that time, you could see, the change beginning to occur. And today it's, like I said, it's very close. There was a period of time when I was working as Deputy Secretary of State where the Democrat registrations did surpass the Republicans. So when I first entered the legislature, the largest voting bloc, I believe, was Republican at the time, followed by undeclared, followed by Democrat.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And then the undeclareds kept increasing to take over the top spot. And the numbers actually in both parties started to decrease. And then it was kind of doing that.
That's super interesting.
So since 2000, we've seen the party that controls the state legislature bounce back and forth. And I don't see that changing now in the foreseeable future. I think it's going to be, close moving forward. But, people are still moving into the state. It depends on what those attitudes are.
What do you think the biggest thing you'd like for people to be able to know about the election process in New Hampshire? It was one thing that you feel like you're always repeating.
Well, I want to make a statement that people should have confidence in the way New Hampshire elections are run. I don't expect people to take my word for it, even though I know that that's true. But do your own research. Participate as a poll worker. That's the best way to see it firsthand. And polling places could use the help. Observe the process. Spend some time at the polling places. Attend recounts. See how they're run, and talk to the candidates that are out there. And if you have questions, ask your local election officials. Ask the Secretary of State's office. Ask the Attorney General's office, because those people know how the election process runs and how it works, and they can explain it to you.
I think that in the last couple of years, getting more involved in the Republican Party, I never realized how accessible candidates were, and legislators in general. New Hampshire is a very accessible legislation body, and even the people that are running for Congress and Senate, I've been able to meet all of them just by going to meetings.
Yeah,
and
politicians are people too.
Yeah,
and in New Hampshire, 400 state representatives. Each representative has about 3,500 constituents. There's no representation like that anywhere else in the country.
It's funny to hear you tell that story about Donald Trump and to hear like people on the MAGA side, I've heard are pretty upset that you hadn't shared information with the federal government and like you're withholding information, but hearing you give an explanation for it, it's good to hear, especially to know that it doesn't seem like you're a never Trumper type Republican. I mean,
my job is to follow the law, and the Constitution,
exactly,
and that's why I'm there. It doesn't matter, whether it's a Republican or a Democrat. I would do the same thing if it was Joe Biden. And it's, my job is to the citizens of New Hampshire to follow the laws that, their representatives in the State House passed. And if a court disagrees with my interpretation, then, I have to take that into account as well. But, I'm doing the job of the people, and I'm following the laws that they passed.
So can anybody come down to the Secretary of State's office and get more information about the processes, or go online, or where's the easiest place other than they listen to this podcast right now, but everything they need to know is basically on the internet, right?
We put a lot of stuff up online. I have an open door policy in my office, so anybody's welcome to come and talk to me personally. And we put a lot of stuff up on social media now too. So, follow us on Facebook or X, Instagram, I've got some young staff that are technologically savvy, and
They've been putting you on TikTok.
I hope not.
David, I want to thank you for coming down here or coming up here and sitting down and talking election law.
Well, thanks for the invitation. This was fun.
No problem. All right. Thank you, everybody.